Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she scrubbed the last of the dinner plates in the military base kitchen. The water was scalding hot, but she had grown used to it over the past 18 months. At 24 years old, she never imagined her life would lead her to washing dishes and serving meals to Navy SEALs at a forward operating base in Afghanistan. But life had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. The daughter of Mexican immigrants, Maria had grown up in East Los Angeles with dreams bigger than the cramped apartment she shared with her mother and 3 younger siblings. Her father had died in a construction accident when she was 16, leaving her mother to work 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Maria had planned to go to college, maybe study engineering like she had always wanted. But, when her mother fell sick with diabetes and couldn't work anymore, Maria made the choice that would change everything. She enlisted in the army. The recruiter had painted a picture of adventure and opportunity. See the world, learn a trade, earn money for college. What he hadn't mentioned was that sometimes the world you saw was through the steam of an industrial dishwasher in a combat zone. Maria had been trained as a supply specialist, but when she arrived at Forward Operating Base Thunder, they needed kitchen staff more than anything else. So there she was, 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, making sure the most elite soldiers in the world had hot food to fuel their dangerous missions. The SEALs were different from the regular army guys she had worked with before. They moved with a quiet confidence that seemed almost supernatural. They didn't talk much during meals, but when they did, their voices carried the weight of men who had seen things most people couldn't imagine. Maria respected them, but she also felt invisible around them. She was just the girl who filled their coffee cups and made sure there were enough MREs packed for their missions. Tonight was different, though. She could feel the tension in the air as she cleaned up after the evening meal. The SEALs had been huddled in conversation at their usual table, speaking in low voices and checking their watches more frequently than normal. Something big was happening. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, the team leader, approached the serving window as Maria was wiping down the counters. He was a tall man with piercing blue eyes and graying hair at his temples that made him look older than his 35 years. Maria had served him probably 100 meals, but this was the first time he had ever spoken directly to her. "Santos, right?" he asked, his voice carrying that distinctive gravelly tone that came from years of shouting orders in combat. Maria nodded, suddenly, feeling nervous. Had she done something wrong? "Yes, Staff Sergeant." "Is there a problem with the food?" Morrison shook his head. "No, the food's fine. I've got a question for you, though. Your file says you qualified expert marksman in basic training. That's still accurate?" The question caught Maria completely off guard. She hadn't touched a rifle since her initial training over a year ago. Yes, sir. I mean, I was good at it in training, but I haven't had much practice since then. How good is good?" Morrison pressed, leaning against the counter. Behind him, Maria could see the rest of his team watching the conversation with interest. Maria felt her cheeks flush. She had always been modest about her abilities, but the truth was that she had been exceptional with a rifle from the very first day of training. Her instructors had been amazed at her natural ability to judge wind, distance, and timing. She had scored in the top 1% of her training class. "I hit everything they put in front of me," she said quietly. "The instructors said I had a natural eye for it." Morrison nodded slowly. "We've got a situation developing. Our primary sniper took shrapnel to the shoulder during last night's operation. He's alive, but he's not going to be pulling any triggers for at least a month. We've got a mission tomorrow that requires precision shooting, and we can't wait for a replacement to fly in from Bragg." Maria's heart started beating faster. She wasn't sure where this conversation was headed, but she had a feeling it was about to change everything. "I need someone who can hit a target at 400 meters in variable wind conditions," Morrison continued. "The shot isn't the hard part, though. The hard part is staying calm when everything around you is going to hell. You think you've got that in you, Santos?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Maria looked around the kitchen that had been her world for over a year. The industrial sinks, the endless stack of meal trays, the monotonous routine that had slowly been crushing her spirit one day at a time. She thought about her dreams of engineering, of building things instead of just cleaning them. She thought about her family back home, and how proud her father would have been to know his daughter was being asked to stand alongside the most elite soldiers in the world. But, mostly, she thought about the scared 18-year-old girl who had walked off the bus at basic training, determined to prove that she belonged somewhere in this man's army. "I can do it," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside her chest. Morrison studied her face for a long moment, as if he was reading something written there in invisible ink. "This isn't kitchen duty, Santos. If you say yes to this, you're putting your life on the line. More than that, you're potentially putting all of our lives on the line. If you miss that shot, or if you freeze up when the shooting starts, good people might die. You understand that?" Maria felt the weight of his words settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. But, underneath the fear and uncertainty, something else was stirring. It was the same feeling she had experienced on the rifle range during basic training, when everything else faded away except her, the target, and the perfect clarity that came from knowing exactly what needed to be done. "I understand," she said. "And I won't miss." Morrison nodded and turned to walk away, but then stopped and looked back at her. "Be at the armory at 0500. Bring your game face, Santos. Tomorrow you're going to find out what you're really made of." As the SEALs filed out of the dining area, Maria found herself alone with the cleaned plates and the smell of industrial disinfectant. But, for the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about the endless cycle of meals and cleanup that defined her days. Instead, she was remembering the feeling of a rifle in her hands, the way her heartbeat seemed to slow down when she looked through a scope, and the satisfaction of watching a bullet find its mark exactly where she had intended it to go. She finished cleaning the kitchen in record time, her movements quick and efficient as her mind raced through everything she could remember from her marksmanship training. Wind speed calculations, breathing techniques, trigger control, follow-through. The fundamentals that her instructors had drilled into her until they became second nature. Back in her small quarters, Maria sat on her narrow bunk and stared at the wall where she had taped a photo of her family. Her mother looked tired in the picture, but she was smiling as she stood between Maria's 3 younger siblings. They were all depending on the money she sent home each month. If something happened to her tomorrow, what would become of them? But then, she thought about the SEALs who had trusted her enough to ask her to join their mission. These were men who could have requested any sniper in the military, but instead they were willing to bet their lives on a supply specialist who spent her days washing dishes. That kind of trust wasn't something you could take lightly. Maria pulled out a piece of paper and began writing a letter to her mother. Not because she expected to die tomorrow, but because she wanted to make sure someone understood why she was doing what she was about to do. She wrote about dreams deferred but not forgotten, about the responsibility that came with being given a chance to prove yourself, and about the difference between surviving and truly living. As she wrote, Maria could hear the distant sound of helicopters returning from missions, their rotors cutting through the night air like mechanical thunder. Somewhere out there in the darkness, people were depending on soldiers like the ones she would be fighting alongside tomorrow. People who would never know her name, but whose lives might depend on her ability to pull a trigger at exactly the right moment. She folded the letter and placed it in her footlocker, then lay down on her bunk fully clothed. Sleep seemed impossible, but she knew she would need every ounce of strength and focus for whatever tomorrow would bring. As she stared at the ceiling, Maria tried to imagine what her father would say if he could see her now. Would he be proud that his daughter was being given the chance to serve alongside America's most elite warriors? Would he understand why she was willing to risk everything for people she had never met? The questions followed her into an uneasy sleep, where she dreamed of targets that seemed impossibly far away and rifles that felt foreign in her hands. But, even in her dreams, when the moment came to take the shot, her hands were steady and her breathing was controlled. Tomorrow would test everything she thought she knew about herself. Tomorrow would determine whether the quiet confidence she had felt on the rifle range was real courage or just the naive bravado of someone who had never faced real danger. Tomorrow, Maria Santos would discover if she was truly ready to trade her apron for a sniper rifle and step into a world where hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. The alarm clock beside her bunk showed 3:47 a.m. when she finally gave up trying to sleep. In just over an hour, she would report to the armory and begin the most important day of her life. A day that would either prove she belonged among America's elite warriors, or teach her that some dreams were too dangerous to pursue. But, as Maria sat up and began preparing for what lay ahead, she realized that the scared young woman who had spent the last year hiding behind kitchen duties was already beginning to fade away. In her place was someone harder, more focused, and absolutely determined to prove that sometimes the most unlikely heroes were the ones who had been waiting in the shadows all along. The armory was buzzing with activity when Maria arrived at exactly 0500 hours. The SEALs were already there, methodically checking their equipment with the kind of practiced efficiency that spoke of countless missions. Staff Sergeant Morrison looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable in the fluorescent lighting. Santos. Good, you're on time. Petty Officer Chen is going to get you set up with gear. Morrison gestured toward a compact Asian American man who was adjusting the scope on a rifle that looked far more sophisticated than anything Maria had used in basic training. Chen looked up from his work and studied Maria with sharp, intelligent eyes. So you're the kitchen warrior Morrison thinks can shoot, he said, his tone neutral but not unfriendly. No offense, but I've seen a lot of people who looked good on a training range fall apart when bullets start flying back at them. Maria met his gaze steadily. I understand your concern, Petty Officer. I guess we'll find out together whether Staff Sergeant Morrison made the right call. Chen's expression shifted slightly, and Maria caught what might have been the beginning of a smile. Fair enough. Let's see what you can do with this beauty. He handed her the rifle, a Remington M24 sniper weapon system that felt both familiar and foreign in her hands. The weapon was heavier than the basic rifle she had trained with, but as Maria shouldered it and looked through the scope, muscle memory began to take over. Her hands found their positions automatically, and she could feel the subtle balance points that would be crucial for making accurate shots. First thing you need to know, Chen continued, pulling out a map and spreading it on a nearby table, is that this isn't a training exercise. We've got intelligence that a high-value target is going to be meeting with local insurgent leaders at a compound about 6 clicks from here. The meeting is scheduled for 1,400 hours, and our job is to prevent it from happening. Morrison joined them at the table, pointing to various locations on the map. The compound is here, built into the side of a hill with good sightlines in all directions. That's why they chose it. Our primary sniper usually sets up on this ridgeline, about 400 meters out. Good elevation, multiple escape routes, but the wind patterns can be tricky. Maria studied the map, trying to visualize the shot. 400 meters wasn't impossibly long, but it wasn't easy either, especially with variable wind conditions. What's the target profile? She asked, surprising herself with how professional she sounded. Adult male, approximately 6 feet tall, usually wears white robes, Morrison replied. Intel suggests he'll be the one doing most of the talking during the meeting. The locals tend to defer to him, so he should be identifiable even at distance. Chen pulled out a tablet and showed Maria satellite photos of the compound. The meeting typically happens in the central courtyard. You'll have a clear line of sight from the ridge position, but there are likely to be civilians in the area. Children, women, elderly people who aren't involved in the insurgency. That's why we need someone with precision. This isn't a spray and pray situation. The weight of responsibility settled over Maria like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about hitting a target, it was about making a clean shot that would eliminate a threat without endangering innocent people. The kind of shot that required not just skill, but the mental discipline to remain calm under extreme pressure. What about extraction? Maria asked. Once I take the shot, how do we get out of there? Morrison pointed to several routes on the map. Primary extraction is back down the ridge to where the vehicles will be waiting. If that gets compromised, secondary route is through this wadi that leads to an alternate pickup point. The key is to make the shot and get moving immediately. The insurgents will know where the shot came from within seconds, and they'll be coming hard. Specialist Rodriguez, the team's communications expert, looked up from checking his radio equipment. Santos, you ever been under fire before? The question was direct and important. Maria shook her head. No. I've been on this base for over a year, but I've never been outside the wire during a combat operation. The team exchanged glances, and Maria could see them reassessing their confidence in Morrison's decision. She couldn't blame them. They were about to trust their lives to someone whose combat experience consisted entirely of serving meals and washing dishes. Look, she said, setting the rifle down and looking each of them in the eye, I know this is a huge risk for all of you. I know you don't have any reason to trust me except for Staff Sergeant Morrison's instinct and my training scores from over a year ago. But I need you to understand something. I didn't ask for this opportunity, but I'm not going to waste it. I've spent every day for the past 18 months feeling like I was capable of more than what I was doing. Tomorrow is my chance to find out if that's true. Sergeant Thompson, the team's demolitions expert, spoke up from where he was packing charges. It's not about wanting it, Santos. It's about keeping your head straight when the world starts exploding around you. You can't know how you'll react until it happens. Maria nodded. You're right. But, I can tell you this much, I've been thinking about this moment since Staff Sergeant Morrison asked me yesterday. I've run through every scenario I can imagine. I've thought about what happens if I miss, what happens if I freeze up, what happens if everything goes wrong. And, in every scenario I can imagine, I take the shot. Because that's what you do when people are counting on you. Morrison had been listening to this exchange without comment, but now he stepped forward. All right, enough talking. Santos, you need to get familiar with this rifle and this scope. We're moving out in 4 hours, and I want you comfortable with every adjustment, every setting, every little quirk this weapon might have. The next 3 hours were the most intensive training Maria had ever experienced. Chen walked her through every aspect of the rifle system, from basic maintenance to advanced ballistics calculations. He showed her how to adjust for wind speed and direction, how to compensate for temperature and humidity, how to account for the rotation of the Earth over long distances. But, more importantly, he taught her about the mental game of precision shooting. The physical part is maybe 20%, he explained as Maria practiced dry firing at a target across the armory. The rest is all mental. You need to be able to slow down time in your head, to make everything else disappear except you, the rifle, and the target. The moment you start thinking about the consequences, about what happens if you miss, about the people shooting back at you, that's when you lose your edge. Maria absorbed every word, every technique, every piece of advice like her life depended on it. Because it did. They all did. As they prepared to move out, Maria found herself going through a mental checklist that had nothing to do with equipment or tactics. She thought about her family back in Los Angeles, about the mother who had sacrificed everything to give her children a better life. She thought about her father, who had died building something with his hands because he believed in creating rather than destroying. She thought about the dreams she had put on hold, and the chance she now had to prove that she was more than just someone who served food to heroes. The helicopter ride to the drop zone was Maria's first time leaving the base since she had arrived in Afghanistan. As they flew over the rugged landscape, she could see the scattered villages and ancient irrigation systems that told the story of a people who had been fighting for survival in this harsh environment for thousands of years. It was beautiful in its own way, but she could also see why it had been the graveyard of empires throughout history. Chen sat beside her, occasionally pointing out landmarks and potential threats. See that ridge line to the south, he said through the headset. That's where we'll be. Good elevation, clear sightlines, but watch the wind patterns. The way the valleys channel the air can make for some tricky shooting. As they approached the drop zone, Maria could feel her heartbeat starting to accelerate. This was really happening. In a few hours, she would be looking through a scope at a human being, preparing to take a life. The thought should have terrified her, but, instead she felt a strange kind of calm settling over her mind. Morrison's voice crackled through the headset. 2 minutes to drop zone. Santos, you ready for this? Maria looked out the window at the desolate landscape rushing past below them. In a few minutes, she would be on the ground in enemy territory, carrying a rifle and the trust of some of America's most elite warriors. Everything in her life had led to this moment. I'm ready, she said, and, for the first time since this all began, she truly believed it. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and debris. The SEALs moved with practiced efficiency, grabbing their gear and establishing a defensive perimeter while the aircraft's engines wound down. Maria followed Chen's lead, her rifle slung across her back and her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline that felt surprisingly familiar. As they began the hike toward their position, Maria realized that the scared young woman who had been washing dishes yesterday morning was already becoming someone else. Someone harder, more focused, and absolutely determined to prove that when the moment came, she would be ready to pull the trigger and change everything. The ridgeline was everything Chen had promised and worse. The wind whipped across the rocky terrain in unpredictable gusts, carrying fine sand that stung exposed skin and made breathing more difficult. Maria lay prone behind a natural rock formation, the M24 rifle steady on its bipod as she studied the compound through her scope. The target area was exactly as the intelligence photos had shown, but seeing it in person made the shot seem more challenging. The compound sat in a natural bowl surrounded by low hills, with the central courtyard clearly visible from Maria's position. But the distance seemed greater than 400 meters, and the wind patterns were creating visible heat shimmer that would affect bullet trajectory. Range to target? Morrison asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the wind. Maria adjusted her scope and double-checked her calculations. 437 meters, she replied, her voice steady despite the anxiety building in her chest. Wind is variable, maybe 8 to 12 knots from the northwest, but it's shifting. Chen crawled up beside her, studying the compound through his own spotting scope. I count at least 15 people down there, maybe more. Adults and children. The meeting hasn't started yet, but there's definitely activity. For the past 2 hours, they had watched the compound slowly fill with people. Women carrying water jugs, children playing in the dusty courtyard, elderly men sitting in whatever shade they could find. It was a reminder that even in a war zone, life continued with its daily rhythms and routines. But Maria also knew that somewhere among those people was a man whose death could save the lives of countless innocents. Intelligence suggested he was planning coordinated attacks against civilian targets, including schools and hospitals. The mission wasn't about politics or territory, it was about preventing mass casualties. Movement in the main building, Rodriguez reported from his position monitoring radio communications. Intel chatter suggests the target is arriving soon. Maria felt her pulse quicken as she adjusted her position slightly, making sure the rifle was perfectly aligned. She had been holding this position for nearly an hour, and her muscles were beginning to ache from the sustained tension. But Chen had taught her to work through discomfort, to make it just another factor to be managed rather than a distraction. Through her scope, she could see a black SUV approaching the compound from the east. It moved slowly, deliberately, with the kind of caution that suggested its passengers were aware they might be under surveillance. 2 men got out first, obviously security personnel who immediately began scanning the surrounding hills. That's our boys' security detail, Morrison observed. Target should be coming out of that vehicle any second now. Maria's breathing slowed automatically as she entered what Chen had called the zone, that mental state where everything except the shot disappeared from conscious thought. Her world narrowed to the circular view through her scope, the feel of the rifle against her shoulder, and the gentle pressure of her finger against the trigger. A third man emerged from the SUV, and Maria immediately knew this was her target. He was tall, wearing white robes as intelligence had predicted, and he moved with the kind of confidence that came from being accustomed to command. As he walked toward the main building, the other people in the compound seemed to defer to him, stepping aside and bowing slightly as he passed. Target identified, she whispered. White robes, 6 feet tall, entering the courtyard from the east side. I confirm, Chen replied through his spotting scope. That's our guy. The target stopped in the center of the courtyard and began speaking with several local men who had been waiting for him. Even at this distance, Maria could see that the conversation was animated, with gestures toward different parts of the surrounding area. They were clearly discussing something important, probably the attacks that intelligence had warned about. Santos, you have a clear shot, Morrison said quietly. Wind is steady from the northwest at about 10 knots. When you're ready, take it. Maria's finger tightened on the trigger as she made final adjustments for wind and distance. The target was standing still, presenting a perfect profile shot. This was the moment she had been preparing for since yesterday, the test that would determine whether she truly belonged among these elite warriors. But, as she prepared to fire, a small child ran into her field of view, chasing a ball that had rolled into the courtyard. The boy couldn't have been more than 6 years old, and he was heading directly toward the area where the target was standing. Child in the line of fire, Maria reported, her voice tight with frustration. I can't take the shot. He'll move, Chen said. Wait for it. But the child didn't move. Instead, he stopped near the target and began talking to him, apparently asking for help retrieving his ball. The target smiled and handed the ball back to the boy, patting him on the head before sending him on his way. Maria watched this interaction through her scope with mixed emotions. The humanity of the moment was impossible to ignore. A man who was supposedly planning to kill innocent people had just shown genuine kindness to a child. But she also knew that history was full of people who were capable of both great tenderness and terrible cruelty. The child finally ran off, and the target resumed his conversation with the local men. Maria reacquired her sight picture and prepared to fire again. Shot is clear, she whispered. But, before she could squeeze the trigger, the sound of approaching helicopters filled the air. Not American helicopters, the distinctive wop-wop of Soviet-era aircraft that the insurgents had somehow acquired. The target and his security team immediately looked toward the sound, and Maria could see them beginning to move toward the building. "Abort," Morrison commanded. "We've got enemy air assets inbound, and our extraction window is closing fast." Maria felt a surge of frustration. After all the preparation, all the mental conditioning, the shot was being taken away from her just as she was about to prove herself. But she also understood that in combat, missions rarely went according to plan. Adaptability was just as important as marksmanship. "Target is moving toward the building," Chen reported. "If we're going to take this shot, it has to be now." Morrison was quiet for a moment, weighing the risks. The approaching helicopters were still several minutes away, but once the target reached the building, he would be protected by walls and cover. This might be their only chance to complete the mission. "Santos, you've got 30 seconds before we need to move. If you can make the shot, take it. If not, we extract immediately." The pressure was unlike anything Maria had ever experienced. Not just the pressure of making a difficult shot under combat conditions, but the knowledge that the success or failure of the entire mission now rested on her shoulders. These men had trusted her with their lives, and she was about to find out if that trust was justified. The target was walking quickly toward the building, but he hadn't started running yet. Maria tracked him through her scope, leading slightly to account for his movement. The wind had shifted again, but only marginally. The range was still manageable. "Steady," Chen whispered beside her. "Breathe, relax, squeeze." Maria's world contracted to the size of the scope's reticle. She could see the target's face clearly now, could see the worry lines around his eyes as he looked toward the approaching aircraft. For a split second, she hesitated, thinking about the man's humanity, about the child he had just been kind to, about the complexity of a war where clear lines between good and evil were often impossibly blurred. But then, she thought about the intelligence reports, about the schools and hospitals that would be targeted if this man lived, about the innocent people who would die if she failed to take this shot. Sometimes being a soldier meant making terrible choices in impossible situations. Maria took a deep breath, let half of it out, and gently squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and through the scope she saw the target stumble and fall. His security team immediately rushed to his position, but Maria could see from their body language that it was too late. The shot had found its mark. "Target down," she reported, her voice surprisingly calm. "Mission complete." "Outstanding shot," Morrison said, but his tone was all business. "Now let's get the hell out of here. Those helicopters are getting closer, and we don't want to be here when they arrive." As the team quickly packed their gear and prepared to move to the extraction point, Maria felt a strange mixture of emotions. Relief that she had successfully completed her first combat mission. Pride that she had proven herself capable of operating at the highest level. But also a heavy sadness at having taken a life, even the life of someone who represented a threat to innocent people. Chen fell into step beside her as they began the rapid descent from the ridgeline. "How do you feel?" he asked. Maria considered the question carefully. "Like I did what needed to be done," she said finally. "But also like I'll never be exactly the same person I was yesterday." Chen nodded. "That's the right answer. The day you stop feeling the weight of what we do out here is the day you should find a different job." As they reached the extraction point and prepared to board the helicopters that would take them back to base, Maria looked back toward the compound one final time. The insurgent helicopters had arrived and were circling the area, but it was too late. The mission was complete, and the threat had been eliminated. Tomorrow she would probably be back in the kitchen, serving meals and washing dishes. But she would never again be just the girl who worked in the mess hall. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, had proven herself in the most demanding test imaginable, and had earned her place among warriors who she had once viewed as unreachable. The flight back to base was quieter than the flight out had been. Each member of the team was lost in their own thoughts, processing what had just happened and preparing for whatever came next. But as they flew over the rugged landscape toward the safety of the forward operating base, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. She felt like she finally knew who she was meant to be. The debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Thunder felt smaller than Maria remembered. She sat at a metal table across from Staff Sergeant Morrison and Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base commander, while her hands trembled slightly from the adrenaline that was still working its way out of her system. 3 hours had passed since the mission, but she could still feel the kick of the rifle against her shoulder and see the moment when her target fell through the scope. Colonel Hayes was a stern woman in her 40s who had commanded respect from every soldier on the base since the day she arrived. Maria had served her meals dozens of times but had never spoken to her directly. Now the colonel was reading through mission reports and studying Maria with sharp, evaluating eyes. "Specialist Santos," the colonel said finally, "Staff Sergeant Morrison's report indicates that you performed exceptionally under combat conditions. A single shot, 437 meters, variable wind conditions, and a clean kill with no collateral damage. That's impressive work for someone whose primary military occupational specialty is supply operations." Maria felt a flush of pride at the praise, but she also sensed that this conversation was heading somewhere she hadn't expected. "Thank you, ma'am. I was honored to serve with the team. The question now," Colonel Hayes continued, "is what we do with you going forward. Morrison has requested that you be permanently assigned to support SEAL operations in a sniper capacity. He believes your skills are being wasted in the kitchen." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. A permanent assignment with the SEALs? It was an opportunity she had never even dared to imagine, but it also meant leaving behind everything familiar and stepping into a world where every day would bring life or death situations. However, the colonel continued, there are significant obstacles to such an arrangement. You would need additional training, formal sniper school, advanced combat courses. And, frankly, the Army doesn't typically reassign supply specialists to elite combat roles based on a single mission, no matter how successfully executed. Maria felt her heart sinking. Of course it wouldn't be that simple. She had proven herself once, but the military was a bureaucracy that moved slowly and followed established procedures. The chance she had been given yesterday was probably a once-in-a-lifetime exception. Morrison leaned forward in his chair. "Ma'am, with respect, Santos didn't just make a lucky shot out there. She demonstrated tactical awareness, emotional control under pressure, and the kind of natural shooting ability that can't be taught. My team trusted her with our lives, and she delivered. That counts for something." "It counts for a great deal," Colonel Hayes agreed. "Which is why I've been on the phone with some people at the Pentagon for the past 2 hours." She opened a folder and pulled out several documents. "It seems that there's been growing interest in expanding opportunities for female soldiers in combat roles. Your mission yesterday, and the way you performed under pressure, has attracted attention at very high levels." Maria's pulse quickened. "What kind of attention?" "The kind that can open doors," the colonel replied. "I've received authorization to offer you several options. Option 1, immediate transfer to sniper school at Fort Benning, followed by advanced training and potential assignment to specialized units. Option 2, return to your current duties with a commendation and the knowledge that you served your country with distinction when called upon. Option 3, discharge from the Army with full benefits and assistance in pursuing civilian opportunities, including educational funding." The three choices laid out before Maria represented three completely different futures. She could chase the dream of becoming a professional sniper and special operations soldier, she could return to the safety and predictability of her current role, or she could leave the military entirely and pursue the engineering degree she had always wanted. "How long do I have to decide?" Maria asked. 24 hours, Colonel Hayes replied. "I know it's not much time, but the Pentagon wants an answer quickly. If you choose option 1, you would be leaving for Georgia within the week." As Maria walked back to her quarters, her mind was spinning with possibilities and doubts. The conversation in the debriefing room had changed everything, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for the changes it would bring. Yesterday she had been content with her role in the kitchen, finding small satisfactions in serving others and sending money home to her family. Today she was being offered the chance to become something she had never imagined possible. She found Chen waiting outside her quarters, cleaning equipment with the methodical precision that seemed to define everything the SEALs did. He looked up as she approached, studying her expression with those sharp, intelligent eyes. "Heard you had a meeting with the colonel," he said. "How'd that go?" Maria sat down on the steps beside him, grateful for the chance to talk through her thoughts with someone who understood the weight of the decision she was facing. "She offered me sniper school. Full training, potential assignment to special operations units. Everything I proved yesterday that I might be capable of." Chen nodded slowly. "That's a hell of an opportunity. Not many people get a chance to completely reinvent themselves based on a single moment of excellence. But? Maria prompted, sensing there was more he wanted to say. But, you need to understand what you're signing up for, Chen continued. Yesterday was just the beginning. If you go down this path, you'll be training for months, then, deploying to places where the missions are harder, the stakes are higher, and the margin for error is non-existent. You'll see things that will change you in ways you can't imagine. And, you'll be asked to do things that will stay with you for the rest of your life. Maria was quiet for a moment, thinking about the weight of the shot she had taken that morning. Do you ever regret it? The choice to become what you are. Chen was quiet for a long time, his hands continuing their practiced motion as he cleaned and oiled the weapon components. I regret some of the things I've had to do, he said finally. But, I don't regret choosing to be in a position where I could do them when they needed to be done. The world is a complicated place, Santos. Sometimes the only thing standing between innocent people and terrible things is someone willing to make hard choices. That evening, Maria found herself back in the kitchen, preparing what might be her last meal service at the base. The familiar rhythms of cooking and cleaning felt strange now, as if she was going through the motions of someone else's life. The other kitchen staff treated her normally, apparently unaware that she had spent the day in combat with the SEALs, but Maria could feel the weight of her secret changing how she moved through the world. As she served dinner to Morrison's team, each of them acknowledged her with subtle nods or quiet words of respect. These men who had once been distant figures were now comrades who had trusted her with their lives. The transformation felt surreal, but it was also deeply meaningful in ways she was still trying to understand. Later that night, Maria sat at her small desk and began writing another letter to her mother. This time, the words came easier, because she had finally figured out what she needed to say. Mama, she wrote, I know you worry about me being so far from home, and I know you're proud of the money I've been able to send to help with the bills. But, I need you to understand that I've discovered something about myself that I never expected. I'm not just good at serving others, I'm good at protecting them. Really good. And, I think Papa would understand why I need to follow this path, even though it means more danger and uncertainty. She wrote about duty and sacrifice, about the difference between surviving and truly living, about the responsibility that came with being given extraordinary gifts. She wrote about the shot she had taken, and the lives that had been saved because she was willing to pull the trigger when it mattered most. But, mostly, she wrote about love. Love for her family, love for her country, love for people she would never meet but whose safety might someday depend on her willingness to stand in harm's way. When she finished the letter, Maria sealed it in an envelope but didn't mail it immediately. Tomorrow she would give Colonel Hayes her answer, and, depending on what that answer was, she might need to write a different version. As she prepared for bed, Maria thought about the 18-year-old girl who had enlisted in the army to help her sick mother pay the bills. That girl had been brave in her own way, willing to leave everything familiar behind for the greater good of her family. But, she had also been reactive, driven by circumstances rather than by a clear vision of who she wanted to become. The woman who lay down in that narrow bunk was different. She had been tested under the most extreme conditions imaginable and had proven that she possessed not just skill, but the mental toughness to use that skill when lives depended on it. She had looked through a rifle scope at another human being and made the hardest choice a soldier could make, not because she enjoyed it, but because it was necessary. Tomorrow she would choose between safety and uncertainty, between the familiar and the unknown, between being someone who served heroes and being a hero herself. It was the most important decision of her life, and, for the first time since she was 18 years old, she felt truly ready to make it. The clock on her wall showed 11:47 p.m. when Maria finally drifted off to sleep. In her dreams, she stood on a firing range that stretched to the horizon, with targets that represented every choice she had ever made and every choice she might make in the future. In her hands was a rifle that felt perfectly balanced, perfectly familiar, perfectly suited to help her become whoever she was meant to be. When she woke at dawn, Maria Santos knew exactly what her answer would be. The girl who had spent 18 months washing dishes and serving meals was ready to become the woman who would spend the rest of her career protecting the innocent and serving her country in ways she had never imagined possible. She had gone from kitchen duty to sniper mode in a heartbeat, and, as Staff Sergeant Morrison had said, this moment would stay with them all forever. But, more importantly, it would stay with her, a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary people were capable of the most extraordinary things when given the chance to prove themselves. The transformation was complete. Maria Santos was ready to become the sniper she was always meant to be.